Plenty of seats here. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to the Institute. I'm delighted. We have a very distinguished speaker. We've also a very distinguished chair that you'd be familiar with, Dave Donoghue. So I'm going to hand over to Dave. And thank you all very much. I'm really looking forward to the session.
Thank you very much, Alex. So my name is David Donoghue, and I'm pleased to welcome you all online and in the room to this event, which is part of the IIEA's Development Matters series, sponsored by Irish Aid. We're delighted to be joined today by Doreen Bogdan-Martin, Secretary General of the International Telecommunications Union, who has generously taken time from a very, very busy schedule to speak to us. Before I formally introduce Doreen, I'd like to ask Emer Friel of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Irish Aid to say a few opening remarks on behalf of Irish Aid. Emer.
Thank you very much, and good lunchtime to everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are in the world. Really glad to be here today to welcome you all to the second of the 2026 Development Matters lectures or talks with Doreen Bogdan-Martin, Secretary General of the International Telecommunications Union. So the Development Matters series is a very valuable forum for us in Irish Aid and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, because it provides that space for convening global experts and leaders to share knowledge and insight on key development issues, and equally to share some of our work with the public and communicate our own development priorities. So can I start by saying a very big thank you to all at the IEEE, to Alex White, to Jill, to your team around you, for all the work that goes into organising not just today, but for the lecture series in its entirety. It's very valuable for us as well. Might just say a few words on the ITU to get into it. It's a United Nations specialised agency for information and communication technologies. So this means they allocate global radio spectrum and satellite orbits, develop technical standards that ensure networks and technologies seamlessly interconnect, and strive to improve access to ICTs to serve underserved communities worldwide. That's quite a lot. It sounds very technical, in many ways it is. But as you'll hear over the course of the conversation here today, it's a crucial organisation in many ways for how the world operates, and as a consequence is highly consequential when considering the significant challenges that we face. So we're very fortunate to have you here today, Secretary General. You're bringing with you a significant experience, the first woman ever to head the ITU since 2022. But before this, as acting as director of the Telecommunication Development Bureau at the ITU, where you were instrumental in placing sustainable digital development at the forefront of international cooperation. And prior to that, informative as the executive director of the ITU UNESCO Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development. I hope you go into a little bit about what that actually means and what you achieved in that. But we are looking forward to exploring today's theme, which is connecting the unconnected and leaving no one behind, exploring how digital technologies and AI can advance development. Anyone with a passing interest in technology and AI will know that the applications are seemingly endless. So we're hoping to hear from you this afternoon about demonstrating some of this range and speaking about how AI can be used for inclusion by providing access to healthcare and education, for example, to developments in cybersecurity and protection of critical infrastructure from energy to subsea cables. Let me leave it at that. Let me say thank you to all of you online and in the room here for joining us today. And I'll hand you back to David, who's going to moderate the event. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Emer. So just some housekeeping points. First of all, the Secretary General will speak to us for about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll go to Q&A with the audience. For those who are in the room, please raise your hand if you have a question or comment, and there'll be a microphone. I'll keep an eye on online questions. You'll be able to join the discussion using the Q&A function on the Zoom, which you'll find on your screens. Please feel free to send in questions as they occur to you during the session, and we'll come to as many as possible in the time available. A reminder that today's presentation and the Q&A are both on the record. Emer has briefly introduced the Secretary General. Doreen Bogdan-Martin has been in this post since January 2023. She's held leadership positions in the field of international telecoms policy for over 3 decades, and she has a track record of brokering innovative partnerships to expand digital inclusion and connectivity for everyone. She served, as Emer said, I think, as the Executive Director of the Broadband Commission for Sustainable Development. In the interest of time, I will stop the presentation at that point and ask the Secretary General to address us. Thanks very much, Doreen.
Well, thank you so much, Dave and Irmer, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I want to thank the Institute of International and European Affairs for the very kind invitation. And also, it's great to be part of this specific series about development matters. And I think I would add to that, digital development matters, because there is clearly a crucial link between development and digital, especially in the age of artificial intelligence. So I thought I would perhaps start and share a little bit more about what the ITU really does to those that might be unfamiliar. And so I like to think that every time you actually pick up your phone and make a call, or if you're trying to navigate a new city using GPS, or you're trying to stream an event online, like some of our online participants are doing today, that's actually ITU's work. That's what we do as the UN agency for all things digital. We were set up back in 1865. We are the oldest organization in the UN system. We actually predate UPU. We had some chats about that this morning. So we go back to 1865. We're 161 years old this year. And our story goes back to the telegraph. And back in the day, you had 20 countries, European countries, that came together in Paris and signed the International Telegraph Convention and created the International Telegraph Union that then became the International Telecommunications Union. And the reason that they did that was to ensure the transmission of telegraphic messages, and that the transmission of those messages could move seamlessly from one country to another. And I think when we look to Ireland, Ireland actually played an important role in that story back in 1866, and we were also chatting about this this morning. In 1866, the first commercially viable transatlantic cable connected Valentia Island to the Americas. And that actual connection cut communication time from weeks to minutes. It was historic. And that cable actually operated quite successfully for over a century. And today, about 3/4 of subsea cables in the Northern Hemisphere pass, I would say, near or through the Irish waters, making Ireland a kind of linchpin when it comes to global connectivity. I think also Ireland's economy tells a similar story when it comes to resilience. This country is a digital powerhouse, hosting 16 of the top 20 tech firms in the world. And with digital contributing about 13% of GDP, I think we can fairly say that Ireland is that digital powerhouse. But continued digital resilience here, and I would say in Europe and around the world, actually requires trust, as we see more frequently these days, the importance of trust, shared values, and also cooperation across borders. And I think that's something that ITU does best. Like Ireland, we believe that everyone deserves a fair shot at prosperity and opportunities that digital actually brings and can offer. I heard this directly from Prime Minister Martin when he attended the G20 summit in South Africa. And in one of his interventions, he spoke about digital inclusion as a key enabler of a growing economy and the need to reach the furthest behind first, coming back to what you were saying, Dave, before. So reaching that furthest behind first. And that's why the ITU really needs member states like Ireland and partners like IIEA to help us bring the benefits of digital to those hardest to connect places, whether it's connecting every school on the planet to the internet. We have an initiative that we run with UNICEF where we're trying to connect every school on the planet to digital technologies, or whether it's helping to protect the most vulnerable through our work on child online protection. And I think that initiative has taken on some new urgency in the age of artificial intelligence. And so I thought I would offer 3 observations, and then we can have more further discussions. 3 observations on how digital technologies are actually shaping these efforts, and where I think the work of our institutions can actually align. And so the first observation that I would offer is that it's impossible to talk seriously about artificial intelligence or any other technology for development when we still have billions of people today that are not connected, that have never, ever connected to the internet. And connectivity is not a luxury. It is foundational development infrastructure. The internet enables access to things like education, to healthcare, to financial services, to markets, and much, much more. And today, those 2.2 billion people are offline. Let's also remember that some 700 million people still lack access to electricity, and that link between access to energy and electricity and the link to digital technologies is an important one. And then on top of it, affordability remains a significant barrier. It's a barrier to adoption of digital. In parts of Africa, by way of example, the cost of basic broadband exceeds the UN affordability target that was set by the Broadband Commission. You were asking about that before. And so in some parts, it exceeds this target that we set. And I would say in the worst case, we can go up to the cost being some 25% of monthly GNI. That's huge. And so when we look to artificial intelligence, AI can either deepen existing digital divides through exclusion, meaning that people will be missing out on new economic opportunities, skilling opportunities, market opportunities, or it can accelerate opportunity by having connectivity, by having the skills, and by having affordability firmly in place. And that means in terms of cost of services, but also in terms of cost of devices. I have seen, I would say firsthand, some of these challenges on a recent visit that I had at the end of last year to a refugee camp in Chad. And this visit was part of an initiative that we have with UNHCR, and I think you had the former leader of UNHCR, Filippo, with you previously. And so we have an initiative with them, and it's about bringing connectivity to refugee camps. And in those camps, of course, you have displaced persons, and that access to affordable connectivity, reliable connectivity can mean access to education in local languages, access to healthcare, access to loved ones that you may have been displaced from, and to see it firsthand, I think it's kind of a no-brainer. We got to get it done because it can bring such significant change for those vulnerable groups. I think also when we look to digital development, we have to remember that digital development is always going to evolve. It doesn't just end. And as we think about future advances, I think we also have to keep in mind closing current divides, but making sure that we're always skilling, reskilling, upskilling, which is so critical. And then the second observation that I would offer is that in a geopolitically fragmented world, Neutral and multi-stakeholder platforms like the ITU are really needed, needed to bring governments together around the table, needed to bring industry around the table, academic institutions, technical institutions, so that we can keep digital development in focus and on the table. Trust in institutions and multilateralism, as we see every day, is under strain, and global attention seems laser focused on competition amongst major powers. But we can't allow this to obscure the reality of the many. And since 2020, around 165 million people have been pushed into poverty due to compounding shocks from the global pandemic to even climate-related disasters. Developing economies are now prioritizing debt servicing over investments in healthcare, in education, and digital infrastructure, as the Prime Minister also mentioned back at the G20. And so without that cooperation and without having shared technical foundations and common standards, the risk of an increasingly fragmented digital future is real. And so we have to keep that in mind. And I think countries with strong research traditions and a deep demonstrated commitment to multilateralism, like Ireland, I think are well placed to help anchor digital development in trust, evidence, and shared approaches. I also think this is where ITU's role becomes especially relevant as we enter into the age of artificial intelligence, helping to translate ambition into practical foundations to be able to allow countries to deploy artificial intelligence in ways that are trustworthy, interoperable, and also aligned with their own national development priorities. This can look like facilitating the rules on how networks interoperate, which is something ITU focuses on, or it can look like how radio spectrum and satellite orbit resources are shared, or how global standards can actually lower cost. And I think also much, much more. For the ITU, ours is an inclusive approach because when technical systems actually work together, investment flows more easily. Infrastructure and services then reach the hardest to connect, and we can help ensure that the most vulnerable get their fair shot at development. I would say I also recently saw this. I was earlier this week, I think I'm bringing the rain with me. I was in Portugal and in Porto specifically, and they have had terrible, terrible storms over the past 10 days. And so we gathered in Porto for the International Submarine Cable Advisory Body and the Submarine Cable Summit that followed. And this gathering brought together governments, industry, and different experts to look at how we can ensure submarine cable resilience. And I know how important this is to Ireland. We looked at things like how do we make sure repairs happen much more quickly if a cable is actually disrupted or cut? How can we ensure better information sharing practices? How can we ensure geographic diversity when it comes to routing of cables? While at the same time keeping the needs of developing countries and small island developing states in focus. And I think it's fair to say we had a really good outcome this week because we actually achieved consensus on a part of infrastructure which is often overlooked because we don't see it. They often say submarine cables are the invisible infrastructure, but in many ways they are the lifeline of our digital world. And so linked to that, and this is my final observation, for ITU, we have named 2026 as the year of digital lifeline. So building that resilience piece into our work throughout the year. And amid escalating natural disasters and increasing dependence on technology, collaboration on resilient digital infrastructure is absolutely crucial. Whether we're talking about what happens in the sky with the proliferation of new satellite systems, or what happens in the sea with submarine cables. And I think also, especially coming back to small island developing states and least developed countries, where that reliable connectivity underpins recovery when it comes to climate impacts. And of course, it's also very linked to supporting inclusive economic growth. Throughout this year, we'll have a number of important gatherings in the ITU. In July, we have our World Summit on the Information Society. Again, we'll be bringing together our multi-stakeholder community, governments, the private sector, civil society, development actors, and we'll be focused on that inclusive digital development. At the same time, we'll hold our AI for Good Global Summit, bringing innovators and experts and policymakers together to look at real-world challenges, including disaster management, recovery and early warning systems. I know you've had Celeste Salo recently with you as a speaker, and we work very closely with WMO on the Early Warning for All initiative, which actually has a subgroup on artificial intelligence, because that is also a critical piece when we're trying to get those warnings and be able to develop modeling and predictions when it comes to natural disasters. So we have the WSIS AI for Good. I think that's a powerful crossover. But I also wanted to mention that we will be supporting the first ever UN Global Dialogue on Artificial Intelligence. That will take place, as I said, in July, and it will be back-to-back with the ITU's AI for Good Summit. And then later this year, and I think this is also particularly important for Ireland, as you will have taken up your presidency of the EU Council, we will hold the ITU Plenipotentiary Conference. It's a gathering that happens every 4 years. It will take place in November in Doha, Qatar. That conference is important for many reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is that it will chart the strategic direction of the organization for the next 4-year period. And so Ireland's leadership on the council will also be helpful to drive forward positive proposals linked to digital development and the future of the union. There's also real scope to plug into these 3 pillars of the EU strategic agenda. So that's security pillar, the values piece, and of course the competitive piece, which I know is so important here as well in Ireland. And I think we can plug in those pillars and looking at ITU's work on digital infrastructure resilience, as I said, from satellites to subsea cables, to things like online safety, responsible AI governance, digital literacy, skilling, so that economies can keep pace with the technologies of the future. I think in all of these areas, Ireland's leadership and digital experiences are both valuable and instructive. And I do think that they should be shared with other nations. A good place to start is something that the ITU has put together. It's a sort of coalition pledging platform that we call Partner to Connect. It's about reaching those hardest to connect. And we invite governments, different global institutions, the private sector, to make commitments to help us close the connectivity gap, to bring the necessary skilling, and to facilitate adoption of new technologies. We have a target to get to by the end of this year, and that's 100 billion. So far, we're just over 80 billion. So what I would encourage you to jump in and help support that important cause. And as this year of resilience will stretch out before us, I think our collective challenge is very clear. We have to ensure that artificial intelligence and other emerging technologies actually strengthen development outcomes, that they deliver opportunities, and that they bridge divides rather than deepening them. We have to ensure that access is affordable, that it's beneficial, that it's safe and it's inclusive. And we have to shape technology through collaboration and not fragmentation. We look forward very much to working closely with Ireland, to the IIEA, I would say, for the next 160 years and beyond, so that we can bring people together, so that technology serves all people and benefits humanity. Again, it's a pleasure to be here and really looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen. That was an extremely interesting and comprehensive account of what the WTU what the ITU is doing, and what the challenges we all face this year. And you've set out a very exciting program of conferences, summits in the course of this year. I suppose one question is, what prospects do you see for advancing consensus on AI and other digital challenges in the current fragmented environment? I mean, you've touched on it, but obviously the ITU is setting the bar high in terms of potential for multilateral agreements with these summit meetings this year. But what's your own assessment of the prospects for making progress?
Yeah. Well, I'm an optimist by nature, and so I do think that consensus can be achieved, because I think all countries understand the importance of connectivity for their economies and for their people. And so with that connectivity at the core of our mandate, we may have differences of opinions. Sometimes we achieve consensus, we like to say, by exhaustion, because we can work around the clock until we find a way. But because of the link of digital to development, digital to economic growth, digital and education, I do think we will find ways forward. And also the summit that I just mentioned that we held in Portugal, I think was a good demonstration, with different viewpoints and countries at the table, the private sector at the table. Even on tricky topics, we did find a way forward, because ultimately everybody agrees that submarine cables have to be resilient. If you have 99% of international traffic going across submarine cables, we better make sure that they're resilient and that they work.
No, that was very reassuring to hear that, and I suppose that partly answers the question that it is possible to achieve consensus in key areas. Just one more question on my own behalf, Doreen, and then we'll go to questions from the audience. You've spoken in the past about aligning the mission of the ITU with the SDGs, and a key part of the SDGs agenda, as you know, is the promise by world leaders that they would leave no one behind, and that they would try to reach the furthest behind first. Now, you can see that as rhetoric, but equally, many countries have chosen to give it some operational follow through. You mentioned what ITU is doing with UNICEF, and that sounds terrific, the idea of connecting digitally every school in the world. But are there other specific things that ITU is doing or could do to reach the groups in society which are most marginalized, most vulnerable? I mean, I have to say that I'm impressed by the very emphasis that you give in your mandate to leaving no one behind. But in terms of thinking through what that means by way of concrete initiatives and policies, are there other things that you can develop there a bit?
Well, for us, when we talk about leaving no one behind, we often say leaving no one offline, right?
Yeah.
And when it comes to ITU's work, our mission and mandate, we would often argue that that connectivity is linked to every single SDG and almost every target. So our work is closely aligned, and there was some discussion, you may even recall, back before the SDGs were adopted, should there be a separate SDG on connectivity or on access to the internet? And so some colleagues say that the middle of your pin is actually SDG 0, and that's access to connectivity, because that's the enabler for all of the other SDGs. Back in 2023, we launched a report with UNDP looking at connectivity as an accelerant to achieve the SDGs. And what we determined was if countries focused on access to connectivity, they could accelerate progress on achieving the SDGs by 70%. A year later, generative AI comes on the scene. And so on top of that research, we put AI, and then the number went up to 80%. And so I think there should be no doubt that investing in digital technologies is an accelerator of development. And so whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's, we're also featured in SDG 9, the infrastructure piece, the partnerships. I think everything that the SDGs cover have a link to digital as an accelerant, as an enabler.
Yeah, no, it's a very powerful case, and 70% or the 80% is quite striking. A question from Colin Rafter. Is the multilateral system robust enough to handle the challenges posed by AI? I mean, this touches in a way on many of your themes today.
Yeah. This is the topic of discussion, right? So the ITU has been engaged in artificial intelligence for many years. A lot of our work started back in 2017. We have a big focus on standards, initially linked to how do you use artificial intelligence to optimize telecommunications networks, for example. We now have over 400 AI-related standards. But also back in 2017, we launched our first AI for Good Summit that I just mentioned. And to develop that summit, we brought together all of our UN partners to figure out how can we talk about AI for good? How can we talk about use cases that each of us may have, either internal or external, in terms of how we deliver our missions? And how can we advance this notion of AI for good? The summit has grown, I would say, dramatically over the past several years, and will reconvene this year. We have also had significant discussions on the policy dimensions, the governance dimensions. We had a governance dialogue, a day that took place at our summit last year. We came out with a series of principles that should be considered. So principles linked to transparency, principles linked to safety, to collaboration, to bridging gaps, capacity development. And, I think everyone is discussing the future of AI. Should you regulate? Should you not regulate? What kind of governance principles should be established? Should they be global? Should they be regional? We have seen a significant increase in the number of countries that now have strategies. It was just a handful a couple of years ago. We now have about 90 countries that have strategies in place. Every part of the world, including the least developed parts of the world, they want to be engaged, they want to be at the table, and they don't want to miss out on the AI revolution. And so I think a global discussion and framework is really important. I think the Secretary General's launch this week of the scientific panel on artificial intelligence is an important one. That panel of 40 members will contribute into the UN SG's first global dialogue on AI governance. And so it'll be, and this is very much science and evidence-based. And so we're looking forward to being part of that discussion. But as you all know, the AI sphere has so many different components, whether it's the security piece, the ethical piece, that we all need to work together. And we're trying to do that in the UN system. We have an interagency group that brings us together. And I think it's important for all countries to come together, share their concerns, and also try to leverage the opportunities and the good that AI can potentially bring.
Exactly. A question here, Doreen, from Seamus Allen, who is a digital policy researcher with the Institute. How does the ITU try to track and adjust for the very rapid technological changes we're seeing? I suppose AI, we have it in, it's developing rapidly, but there'll be others perhaps overtaking it.
Right.
How does the ITU as an organization keep up and adjust its own strategies in light of these rapid changes?
Just one example, we're very focused on quantum as well. which is an issue that many countries and companies are also debating. Some years ago, we were also very focused on the metaverse. So our focus areas, obviously, were driven by our governing institutions and mandates and texts. But we are a member-driven organization. And I think the beauty of the ITU is that we're not just governments. We have our 194 governments, but we also have over 1,000 private sector companies, right? And their businesses are changing all the time. We have over 150 academic institutions. And what's important is when they come together in different ITU gatherings, they can help try to push us in the right directions to be able to respond to the needs of today.
That's very good. Yeah. Having the coalition of governments and private sector. I think there was a question at the yes, please, at the back.
Donald O'Brien, a member of the Institute. It's really a follow-on question to the last question. Given the long history of what is now the ITU in standard setting, and that you survived 2 world wars and the Franco-Prussian War shortly after you were founded, is there a threat to the standard setting system coming from proprietary developments of new technologies that are, I'll use the word, pretty accessible in some ways? One example is the Iridium system that can be used by some Garmin receivers, which is, for certain applications. The other bigger one is obviously Starlink and competing systems. That's a proprietary technology. And is there a threat to the standard setting function coming from that kind of development? We saw it at an earlier stage with MS-DOS versus Apple and Linux. And then the other question then is, to what extent do developments like Starlink assist your work in trying to get connectivity to that refugee camp in Chad?
Doreen.
Yeah. Okay, so when it comes to like the threats and risks, which I think are real, what we try to do is to make sure that everybody comes to the table. And because our standards are driven by members, again, private sector or government, it's really important that in the discussions and the development of those standards, that different constituent groups are at the table. And they all have equal voice when it comes to standard setting. It's not that only the government speak, but also the private sector has an opportunity. I think the other important advancements that we have made on the ITU side is strengthening the collaboration with other standards development organizations. So we have a strong collaboration with ISO, with IEC. We work very closely with IEEE. We saw some years ago that there was this tendency to kind of standard shop around. And I think we have made progress in trying to keep the different institutions together so that we're not competing on the same standard. And so we have to try to minimize those threats and risks by trying to continue to bring everybody together. When it comes to Starlink or any of the other low or Earth orbiting constellations, I think they offer incredible opportunities when it comes to the hardest to connect, when it comes to a situation where maybe a natural disaster or a flood has shut down the infrastructure. The opportunities are big. The price points are interesting. And this is something that's under study for the next radio conference, the World Radio Communications Conference that will take place in 2027, where the agenda is actually about 80% space focused. And so this is a big shift. And we're looking closely at issues around direct-to-device, which is also incredibly exciting. But there are other market concerns linked to direct-to-device. So that's something also under consideration in one of our technical study groups, and we'll come to that treaty-making conference in 2027. But there's a lot of issues around these systems, including authorization requirements within countries. And we're also trying to look at and compare different country practices when it comes to authorizing these kinds of players. I think that's also something ITU does well. We gather experiences and practices of different countries, and we try to set out best practice guidelines.
Great job. Alex, you have a question?
Yeah. Much. My name's Alex White, I'm Director General here at the Institute, as part of the Forbes Minister of Communications. I dealt with this question domestic in Ireland, but I might just mention that in a second. But the board, I mean, it's fascinating. Thank you very much for your presentation and for what you've said in response to the questions. And I mean, the case is unanswerable. Connectivity and what flows from connectivity. It's almost like as if the case doesn't have to be made, but of course, I'm sure in your role, you have to keep making the case. I remember there was a judge of I think the Chief Justice of Zimbabwe spoke here last year, and he was talking about the development of the court system in Zimbabwe in the 19th and 20th centuries. And now this might sound completely off point, but it's not completely so, because he was able to show that the evolution of commercial life and indeed, cultural exchange and so on, but particularly economic and commercial life, developed along the railway lines in Zimbabwe, according as the railway lines were constructed and the trains were moving commercial. I mean, it's almost like a truism. We know that from our basic economic history that that's the truth. And now in the 21st century, we can just see it all the more that, commercial life, cultural exchange, education, as you mentioned, and so on, are almost dependent on adequate access to broadband. And so, but my question really, and all your points about affordability and digital divide and closing those divides are really well taken. I do wonder though, sometimes there's slightly repeat of a question you've been asked already, just with a slightly different angle, the capacity, and I mean the intellectual capacity, engineering capacity, technical capacity within governments and within state agencies and within international agencies, if I may say so. And I'm not making any assumptions about the ITU, but you're around for a long time. If we'd find the expertise anywhere, I'm sure we'll find it there. But I do sometimes worry, and I witness it here, the states have actually, in the last 20 to 30 years, offloaded a lot of capacity that they did have, technical and engineering capacity, obviously. And for good reason, because the investment that was required was only going to come, and the innovation, a lot of it was only going to come from the private sector. But an awful lot of babies went out with an awful lot of bathwater. So the extent to actually control things was lost as well, it seems to me. And I wonder, do you observe that in countries like where you're trying to make your writ run, as it were, try to get the affordability agenda center stage, try to ensure that you get into the rural areas, try to ensure all these important things? Are the states, have they got the capacity to do this, or have they yielded too much to the private sector in many of these countries?
I think the capacity gap is a big one. I would say probably for all countries, in part because the tech sector moves so fast that it's almost impossible for policymakers to keep pace and international organizations to keep pace with the speed of the technology sector. And there's definitely a shortage when it comes to, skill sets. We look at, for example, cybersecurity. There's a huge lack of cybersecurity professionals. There's a huge lack of women in cybersecurity also, by the way. But there are jobs, but we don't have the experts, right? And so I think when it comes to AI, when it comes to even more advanced technologies, we're not able to keep pace with the needed capacities. We also see the impact of artificial intelligence on, changing the job market. Some statistics, even coming out of ILO, will say that we will have more jobs created than jobs lost. But those jobs that are going to be created, are we learning today in our, educational institutions? Are we learning the right things that are going to help people to be able to occupy those functions in the future? So coming back to your specific, I do think there's a gap. We try to have training programs for executives or regulators, et cetera, but I think it's a challenge. And maybe a lot have left to go to the private sector, but it's a challenge even in the private sector to find the skilled talent that they need to be able to develop their businesses.
Yeah, I think there was a question here. Was there Conor? Yeah. Right.
Conor Daly, Trinity College, and a telecoms consultant, as it happens. Secretary General, you spoke about the affordability issues as a follow-up to Alex's question. We didn't mention mobile financial services and financial inclusion. And I'm thinking you must be quite optimistic about the African continent. We got so many new international cable systems landing there. We got data center growth. We have increasing levels of mobile penetration. We have 4G, some countries with 5G. But we also have huge growth, don't we, in MFS, in mobile banking. So what's the role of the ITU in promoting mobile financial inclusion in sub-Saharan Africa?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge one. And thank you for bringing that up, because we've seen tremendous growth in Africa in particular when it comes to mobile money. The ITU does work in the space. We work in it a bit from the standard side, but also from the development side. We have had a partnership with the Gates Foundation. We've done some pilots in countries working with central banks, but it's a huge opportunity. What's interesting is that we still have a big percentage of unbanked. We're looking at the percentage of unbanked, the percentage of not connected, and how can we make the bridge to make sure that everybody has access to digital financial services? I think also the digital ID issue is a big one. And I think we also saw during the pandemic that access to digital services as a whole, digital government services, was accelerated, especially in developing countries, because there was no other way. And so you had to, almost overnight, bring access to digital services that you previously maybe were planning to do in 10 years' time. But again, it comes back to those that are not connected, that want to have access to financial services, that are not banked. And so, how can we bridge, how can we make that bridge? When it comes to affordability as well, trying to get governments to understand that that heavy taxation on devices or even on the services is an impediment to uptake. And so what we've been trying to show together with our friends from the Economic Commission for Africa, who've done some interesting studies on this, is that if you reduce the tax over time, well, your subscription rate will increase. And over time, you won't have that decrease in revenue on the government side. So it will pay off. And so trying to make that case is something that we continue to push.
Yeah, I think there was another one here.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. My name is Cian Fitzgerald. I'm a senior researcher here at the IEEE, and I work on defense and national security. So I spend quite a lot of time thinking about the security of subsea cables in the North Atlantic. But my question is, I have two questions. The first is quite a broad one, which is just your own thinking on the growing securitization of telecommunications infrastructure. So not just the infrastructure itself, but also the supply chains, thinking about, certain countries not liking Huawei equipment being installed, things like that. How is that affecting development cooperation as well? And then my second question, which is maybe more technical on subsea cable infrastructure itself, is some of the newer models of subsea telecommunications cables have sensing capabilities, smart cables, and cables configured with distributed acoustic sensing. And I'm wondering, is this affecting the installation of new cable routes? I'm thinking about some of them with concerns around military applications, obviously. So some countries having concerns about military applications for subsea sensing and submarine warfare. Has this affected where new routes might be installed? Thinking about the Arctic, South China Sea, Asia, areas such as that. Is that affecting connectivity for countries that are sort of caught in the middle there? Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I would say on the security front, I think as a whole, a lot of that work is focused on the standard side. At the same time, from a development perspective, we have something called our Global Cybersecurity Agenda. We have a Global Cybersecurity Index, where we try to help countries understand the key parameters and criteria that they should be thinking about when they put in their own national cybersecurity strategies, when they're setting up their certs, et cetera. I mean, in terms of cybersecurity as a whole. When it comes to infrastructure and security issues linked to infrastructure, the position of the ITU has been that, you know, countries wanting to put in infrastructure, that the private sector, basically countries want to have choice, let me put it like that. And so that the private sector should be looking at market opportunities for those countries looking to advance and expand their infrastructure. We do advocate safety, trust, resilience, reliability. I think those are core principles that the ITU strategic plan and Constitution and Convention underscore. When it comes to the submarine cable issues, what we have seen in recent years, and the whole submarine cable issues, as well as things happening in space, have started to make headlines in ways we never saw before. And so a submarine cable cut may have gone unreported in previous years, but now it's headline news for different reasons. But by creating this recent body that we put together, we were able to do some interesting work with the ICPC and other partners, which clearly said, okay, 200 cuts a year. Most of them come from an anchor or a fishing boat, but others maybe from other sources. In order to ensure that our group could move its work forward, we stayed out of issues linked to attribution and kind of other security issues. Again, we were trying to navigate turbulent seas at time, but we felt it was important to focus on repair, on, you know, diversity, on smart cables, and on the resilience elements. And so sometimes when it comes to tricky, sensitive issues, we may deal with them, but it may also be other UN organizations that have a better place on some of, even on the submarine cable issues, which is why it's important to have different partners at the table.
Sure, of course.
Yeah.
There was another, oh yes, please, yeah.
Alan Sloan from University College Cork. I was just thinking about standard setting, and does the ITU see itself having a role in kind of higher level regulatory divergence, like in the dispute over the Digital Services Act, say between the US and the EU, for example?
Yeah. So on the dispute side, so let me just say, when it comes to regulatory issues as a whole, a lot of that is taken up by our development sector, where we have something called the Global Symposium for Regulators. It's a kind of sharing of different practices, discussions. We come out with best practice guidelines on different things, including things that the European Commission may have directives or regulations on. But when it comes to like enforcement or disputes, I think maybe the best analogy would be to the Radio Regulations Board. So I'm getting some kind of off your question in order to answer your question. So we have in place a Radio Regulations Board. There are 12 members. They're elected by secret ballot, and it's across, it's representative. They're from per region, I think it is. And they deliberate on issues that are brought to their attention that have to do with like radio frequency interference or unauthorized use of a satellite system or terminals. And so they deliberate and their findings are public. I think that's kind of the extent of getting into enforcement, because we have a treaty, which is the radio regulations, and the ITU oversees, and this board, the implementation and adherence to the radio regulations. If there was a dispute between two countries or two different groups on a regulatory framework issue, we might debate it, but we wouldn't have a ruling per se in that case.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance. Hey, please, Johnson. Johnson.
Thanks very much, Secretary General. My name is Joyce O'Connor, chair of the digital group here in the IEEE, but I'm also founder or co-founder of a charity called Block W that addresses the issue of the gender divide in skills and tech. But I was very interested in your focus right at the beginning on, trust and shared values. And it just strikes me when you're talking about connectivity and capacity building, how do we build that trust in the community so that everybody has access, understands, and is even aware of the technologies? And I was struck very much by what you said, that technology moves so quickly. It's hard enough for experts to keep up with it. And Alice's questions about government, it was very well made. But just individuals in the community, how are we going to address that? And you raised refugees and other vulnerable groups. But it strikes me that that focus on trust and shared values is fundamental.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting. Some of our statistics have shown us that you might be covered by a mobile signal. You might be able to afford your smartphone or access to connectivity, but we have more and more cases of people choosing not to be connected. So I think this goes to your point about trust and how do we build trust. It's difficult with online scams, online harassment, cybersecurity. There's a lot of things happening that that concern people and keep people offline. And so to your point, I think it is essential that we work to build trust. I think all stakeholders have a role to play, including government agencies, including the private sector, but also including community groups. Coming to like sub-Saharan Africa, for example, something that's been quite successful in different countries, including Rwanda, where they have a digital ambassadors program. So they trained a group of largely young people, titled them digital ambassadors. They get trained every year and they go out into the field in their local communities. And they basically teach people about connectivity and access to digital services. And if you want them to trust or to adopt, have access to digital financial services, it's making sure that you go out into those communities. And actually another kind of related example, when it comes to early warning systems and effectiveness of disaster preparedness and response, the ITU leads the pillar with WMO. We lead this pillar on communications messaging. And it's not just about getting the alert signal from the central station to your phone. It's also about radio, TV, and even community leaders, so that if we have this trust problem and people are not connected, we still need to have a way to get those life-saving alerts to those that need them, that are in vulnerable areas. And so keeping in mind other communication platforms like radio, which is very popular here in Ireland as well, television, and also through those community leaders is also a critical piece. And I think also goes back to that trust building element.
Thanks, Doreen. Jane Ann.
Thanks very much, Jane Ann McKenna from DOCUS. So we're the network for all the development and humanitarian organisations here in Ireland. Just a question around digital rights. So obviously we're kind of seeing governments use technology against citizens. So for obviously from Afghanistan, but also areas where there's rolling, I suppose, blackouts are used as a way of control. So I'm just curious of where the ITU's role is within that, because obviously that in and of itself is an issue, but also in terms of the reliability, consistency. So if it is a key enabler for all of the SDGs, if that is prevalent across many countries and increasingly so, where's the ITU's role within that?
So our role is to connect the unconnected and to bring connectivity to all people everywhere. And we strongly advocate for that, and we advocate for governments to ensure and enable access to connectivity. I think what we see more and more frequently, certainly there is an increase in internet shutdowns, digital blackouts. We also see an increase in attacks on critical digital infrastructure, which also impacts humanitarian assistance and support. And we have tried to work with different players to ensure that the connectivity stays on, and that in conflict situations that our humanitarian friends and colleagues within and outside the UN system are actually able to do their jobs. We work very closely with the World Food Program has the Emergency Telecommunications Cluster, which is also often called in different situations. And so we work closely with that cluster to also help ensuring access to connectivity, and in many cases to bringing connectivity if it's a conflict situation or a natural disaster, when like satellite terminals or other forms might need to be deployed and enabled quickly.
Thank you very much, Joan. I'm afraid that brings us to the end of the time we have, I think. And on behalf of everybody here and online, I'd like to thank you warmly for the fantastic presentation and your generous willingness to reply to the questions and comments raised. I wish we could have had more time, and you have such a vast portfolio which is so vital for development and humanitarian outcomes that there are endless questions that occur to me personally. Our congratulations to you on handling this portfolio with such great effect, and our best wishes for the program of conferences and summits that you have this year. I hope that they do advance international consensus on all these issues, AI, but all the other human rights related issues which have been brought up. So thank you very, very much, Doreen, and we hope we'll see you back in perhaps more pleasant weather conditions, though it's not just here. And again, a warm thanks. And I know you know Ireland well, but still, every visit you make is greatly appreciated.
Oh, thank you so much, Dave. Thank you.